What is a spiritual awakening? What is a Kundalini awakening? Are they both the same thing? Are they a phenomena? Are they a concept? What does it mean to be in an awakened state? And how does all of this fit into the law of assumption, law of attraction? How does one become a yogi? What does it mean to become a yogi? Who is a mystic? And are there any telltale signs of an awakening, and how is this different from a state of enlightenment, from a state of self-realization and an expansive consciousness? One can be born spiritually awake but without a Kundalini awakening. You can have a Kundalini stirring but not necessarily an awakening. So it's about when you are about to wake up in the morning, there is a stirring, and if you don't do anything about it, you will fall back asleep. But if you wake up, you'll keep up with the waking up. Now, some of us are born spiritually awake. When you're born spiritually awake, what that means is you are born with an awareness of pure consciousness. You're born with an awareness of pure intelligence, of pure love. You're born with an awareness of the totality of our existence. You're already at a point where you're quite acutely aware of spirit. You can call spirit God, the unknown, the everything, the all, or the nothing, whatever it is that you can, so that you're able to relate to what we're sharing today. The spiritually awakened child might be a child that is spiritually awake and will spend most of the childhood or adolescent years, it depends on their life trajectory, awakening. Or something might then happen for them to go back to their awakening process, and therefore they experience a reawakening. This eventually does bring about a Kundalini awakening, which is essential in order for us to transcend our human existence. There'll be more about that a little bit later. So back to the child who is born spiritually awake. A child who is born spiritually awake will have the markings of a very compassionate child. They'll be highly sensitive. They may also suffer from things that might be categorized into sensory disorders or into, not having the capacity to deal with an overload. So their systems become so overloaded because they are already born with a heightened sensitivity, right? Because to be able to be aware of this all pervasiveness of spirit, one must have that kind of nude, bare, vulnerable experience and extrasensory perception, because that is beyond our senses. When that baby is born, there might be certain occurrences towards the happening of that baby. There might be a particular type of parents that baby has chosen, depending on what kind of trajectory they want to get through, which is going to get to a particular point for that reawakening to happen, for that remembering to happen. The child might go through a very normal childhood, but they will already have traits such as benevolence, kindness, gratitude. And because children don't have language until much later, initially they are just copying and making up things that they might not fully understand. They won't know how to explain what they're feeling. As it is, the first 7 years of children, they are generally very sensitive, and they are able to experience the original vision. They're able to experience everything firsthand. And this is why in that sensitivity, They are like sponges and they take on everything. Now, what happens if you're a parent and you have a child with this level of sensitivity? What are you going to do? You're likely to go and seek some kind of advice because you don't know what is happening. Or if you're a parent who is an awakened parent yourself, you may be able to recognize this, nurture this, harness this energy, and find a way of working with this. The spiritually awakening child will eventually become a spiritually awakened child, either much later in their life or during their life trajectory. Eventually, that child will bloom into a full awakening. The second type of spiritual awakening is when certain events in our life take place so that there is no choice but for our mind to shut down, for our senses to be lulled, and for us to experience this profound awakening, which is like a rescue team. It is a calling card. So before the spiritual awakening happens, before you have the shift in consciousness, it could have either come from trauma, near-death experience. It could have come from any profound experiences that you're having, things that really take you to the other side. On the other hand, it can happen quite suddenly when you have been engaged in a lot of intense meditation, very, very diligently, and without an aim in your meditation, mostly. Although even if you do have an aim, sometimes this can happen. Spiritual awakening is not the same as us having different chakras that are open and more active than others, and thereby the characteristic of that particular chakra being heightened. They are not the same. It's not the same thing. So if you have an overactive third eye, for example, if you have an overactive crown chakra, you might find that it's very difficult for you to find the ground beneath you, and we're able to just be living in this other altered states of consciousness, and our life in the 3D dimension, so this life which is gross physical reality, may seem like a dream, and everything else may seem like a reality. So there will still be that divide between this physical life and all the rest of the things that we are experiencing. We can be experiencing things before they even happen in physical life. You could be an awakened child who already knows what grades you're going to get in school before you get them. You could be an awakened child who already knows the answers to whatever questions your teachers are about to ask of you. So there are lots of different things that happen. Now, when the spiritual awakening happens, a paradigm shift of consciousness takes place. Now, what exactly is this? If you like, your consciousness is everything. It's like our modus operandi. It is the manual, not even the manual, but it is the field from which we are operating. If you like, we have a continuum of consciousness. So you could draw like a line or a circle, whichever, or just different Venn diagrams if you like. Now, we will be at any different points, and at whatever point that we slot ourselves in, let's take an example of snakes and ladders. Yeah? You would have played that game of snakes and ladders. Now, we can be anywhere when the die is cast. So the die will be our consciousness, will be our thoughts, and how we're actually presenting wherever we are, which is going to then cause us to be somewhere along this board. Now, wherever we are on this board will then reflect back again into our physical world and will be producing its own experiences to us wherever we are. Now, wherever we are during the spiritual awakening process, right, or even before then, wherever we are on this field, on this consciousness, right, whatever we are producing in terms of our thought, whatever we're producing in terms of any processes that we have, mind or emotions, the more that we do this, we will eventually produce an entity. Yeah, so that thought, by then going back into the field, right, as it keeps going back forth, it develops its own little entity. It becomes like a person of its own character, nature. It has its memorandum and articles of association, as we would say when you're forming a company. So it becomes an entity on its own. Throughout this process, then, when you have been awakened, so you then receive the instruction, the paradigm shift of consciousness. Now, you will have been operating so far that I am this person, I am the identity that I've created. So to give you an example of my own, so say I am born to X and Y and my name is Kirat, and Kirat has gone to this school, Kirat has had this experience, Kirat likes this food, Kirat has these friends, and so Kirat has then developed this personality, this persona, and so I begin to operate within that framework. When we are in that framework, when we are hit by either an awakening or a reawakening that is of a spiritual nature, so that you're opening to the dimension of totality and spirit, what happens is that everything crumbles. So the structure that you were in, the frame that you were in, if you like, there was a stone thrown at a glass frame and it shattered. Yeah. Now, as that shattering takes place, there's no personality left. Now, how do you operate? Right? Now, as this is all going through and it's happening, when the crumbling is taking place and you're now hit with this reawakening, that in itself can become quite unbearable. And when this becomes quite unbearable, we can then be re-traumatized. In that state, in us being experiencing this new shift in consciousness, we will gravitate towards expansive acts of consciousness, more loving, more kindness, more generosity. As we do this, old relationships go, friendships are redefined, your entire framework and network is rehashed. Now you're going through all of this, but some of it might keep you in repeat mode of patterns that might traumatize you, because the spiritual awakening process makes us vulnerable. Our filters disappear. And the biggest filter that disappears is the ego. And this is where we experience the death of the ego, the dark night of the soul, when there is no you. The numbness follows and all else follows from this. Now, when we are in a state of egolessness, when there is no individual, we are highly vulnerable, highly sensitive. This is when we must isolate. Not must, but it's preferred that we are in a cocoon and we are not disturbed. Not all of us will be able to do this. Now, what happens when you don't do it, when you don't follow that lead, is you might end up creating more trauma in a heightened state, already hypervigilant if you were somebody who had already suffered from CPTSD or PTSD prior to your spiritual awakening. And now when you are hit by this spiritual awakening process in your heightened vulnerability, you may be re-traumatized Because one, as a complex organism, as a self-organizing organism that we are, these experiences will be called back upon us so that we can return to wholeness. That's what it means to heal. Now, when this happens, we are more likely to experience a very spontaneous Kundalini awakening. So, Kundalini awakening will literally cause that thing that was stirring inside of us, that is sitting in a kunda, which is sitting right at the bottom, at the Muladhara, it is sitting coiled, right? We say coiled. It is something that we need to uncoil if it has been awoken, but it can wake up and still go back to sleep. Remember, when we wake up, we've got to follow the sequence of waking up and carrying throughout our day. If this Kundalini awakens, that then changes the trajectory somewhat. We're going to continue the next segment of this, so hold on in the next part. All my love, coming back in a minute.